So welcome to the next in our online series of messages brought to you by the friends at Center Congregational Church in Lynnfield, Massachusetts. This is Reverend Tom Bentley, the pastor, hoping that these messages can help you in your life journey. If you'd like to know more about Center Congregational Church, there'll be some information for you at the end of this video. So thank you for spending time with us. Grace to you and peace from our friend Jesus. We've heard the story of the phoenix, the bird that rises out of the ashes of its own immolation. The bird dies, it's burned up, and then comes back to life. It gives us a sense of how life moves in birth and death and rebirth and death and rebirth in a cycle. It also says that in times of disaster and distress, when things are destroyed, from the ruins will rise something new. And if we look honestly at human history, we see actually a general progress and improvement. It wasn't always good and perfect. There was much suffering, but often out of the destruction rose new possibilities. This is certainly the message of the Easter season as we prepare to have that happen on March 31st this year, the day of Easter. We're in Lent and we're building up to a crescendo where eventually Jesus is taken off and crucified and killed by the authorities. And that should be the end of that story, but it's not. Here we are celebrating the life, the death, and the resurrection of Christ. Yes, rising out of the ashes of despair and destruction in that day and our own day. For if we look at history, we see that people gathered around in times of suffering and distress to build anew in the hopes that God's love could save them from continued destruction, but also bring a new way of living, an improved way. One time of great destruction in scriptures recorded when in 586 BCE, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by the invading Babylonian oppressors. And they did something particularly awful. Along with destroying the city, blinding the king by cutting out his eyes and carrying off a number of people, eventually they carried away into captivity most of the residents, the people who lived the surrounding areas of Jerusalem. It was the great deportment. It was a genocide. It was awful. There was a prophet who watched the smoke rise from the ruins of Jerusalem, and he lamented. And we read what he said in the book of Jeremiah. The time is coming when I will make a brand new covenant with Israel and Judah. It won't be a repeat of the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took their hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. They broke that covenant, even though I did my part as their master. God's decree. This is the brand new covenant that I will make with Israel when the time comes. I will put my law within them, write it on their hearts, and be their God, and they will be my people. They will no longer go around setting up schools to teach each other about God. They'll know me firsthand, the dull and the bright, the smart and the slow. I'll wipe the slate clean for each of them. I'll forget they ever sinned. God's decree. The Message translation has that phrase, God's decree. What is that about? It's about the idea that the prophet Jeremiah is delivering verbatim the words of God. These aren't things he sort of made up one afternoon. God speaks through the prophets then and, yes, even now. Jeremiah had an unenviable assignment. He started out decades before this destruction of Jerusalem, warning the people, speaking of doom to the point where he was chastised and even imprisoned. He annoyed everybody. He went around saying, it's coming, the big one. And they pushed him away. They made jokes about him. But when the big one came, they were in distress. And they also said in their hearts clearly, Jeremiah was right. But then the tone of his voice changed. The words through him from God were suddenly words of comfort, words of promise, words of hope, basically saying, there's many translations, but behold, the days are coming when I'll make a new covenant with my children. The old covenant is broken. We face a time now where we have to look at God's promise to us. Things aren't going well in our human story. We seem to be devolving. We seem to be falling back into dark shadows and self-destructive activities. It seems that on the horizon there are clouds of oppression, authoritarianism, and yes, war and violence. We can feel it. We can see it. Jeremiah was the prophet who spoke often of this doomsday inevitability. In Christian tradition, prophets have seized upon the identity of Jeremiah and spoken out when times were of great risk and there seemed to be judgment upon the land. In our own Puritan time, the Puritan preachers spoke these special sermons called Jeremiads, denouncing the sin of the people and warning them that destruction was imminent unless they changed their ways. I've always considered part of my ministry a prophetic job, warning all of us, including myself, that we need to get our act together or bad things are going to come to pass. We're in a time like that. We need our prophets to give us the Jeremiads, to remind us that things can get worse than they are, and that we have a responsibility to turn them about. Who knows what we really face in the future? But we'll know that we're far from the measure of love that God requires of us to prosper and to bring about justice and peace in our earthly life. And thinking about this promise of the new covenant, it's coming to me now in that prophetic office to offer this idea that perhaps the new covenant was not fully delivered in Jesus in the sense of his life, death, and resurrection, and then we're all okay. That's the new covenant that was promised, or so Christians say. Jeremiah was the only prophet of the Old Testament that ever used the term new covenant and promised the same. Christians rallied around the understanding that it had happened in the life and the death and resurrection of Jesus, but it's been a rough 2,000 years since, hasn't it? Things didn't always go well. The new covenant is something that's becoming. It's not just fixed. I suggest that the new covenant will be much like Jeremiah spoke of, but it's not fully in place, despite the work and the struggle of Jesus, despite the miracle of the resurrection. We human beings have yet to own that in our hearts, because it's not an intellectual exercise. That's what Jeremiah said. It's not just how you think or what law you put in place. It's what is willfully inside your being, who you are. There's a new alignment that's needed. I suggest that the new covenant promised by God to all of creation requires a change of relationship to all of creation by we who call ourselves God's children. The great disaster we're facing is more than political war. It's the actual destruction of the organic realm. And it will be human sin and greed that does that. The new alignment is the new covenant. Behold, the days are coming when God will make a new covenant with his children. And this covenant will be written on the hearts of the people and those who follow the truth, who will work to save the blessing of creation itself. That's what's coming. That's what's needed. In the spirit of that, I hope we can understand that we are co-creators and creation is not complete yet. We are in a co-covenant with God and we rarely own it. When we do, we need to evolve and become able to bear the grace and the responsibilities given by God. That's the invitation, to wake up and make a difference, knowing that when we listen to the truth delivered by the prophets and made manifest by God's divine word within us, we can prosper, we can overcome, we can survive even coming times of tumult and destruction. I hope they're not coming. I hope we can clean up our act beforehand. But the signs are not all happy. We need this new covenant of grace and hope if we're to live in a generous new world of prosperity and justice for all. So that's the invitation in this Lenten season. Peace be to you in your journey. Amen. So thank you again for spending time with us. If you'd like to know more about Center Congregational Church, you can go online at centerjazzchurch.org. And of course, we'd always love to hear from you. You can call us at the phone number above or contact us through the email address above. So, blessings to you in your time and your life. Goodbye.